These are two embarrassing truths about my life. 15 years ago, I left New York and I moved to San Francisco, so I'm a little bit better now, but it's still in the background. There is something that I have to harbor some shame about. The second fact about me that is a little embarrassing is a silly title that I have at the company where I work, Prezi, growth hacker. Show of hands, how many of you guys have ever heard this term before? I know one of you has. Yeah. Well, I mean, I wanted to atone for it somehow, particularly for those who've never heard this silly title before. A growth hacker is a term that this guy Andrew Chen popularized in a blog post that he wrote 2 years ago. And the gist is, it's a new kind of marketing that is relevant specifically to websites and web applications and the new modalities that we use in pursuing growth for these businesses versus the other kinds of marketing that we did in the past, right? So in my case, and in the case of most growth hackers that are worth their salt, it's the intersection of three things. It's data, a real passion and understanding for both the installation and the utilization of data in the context of an application. It's a creative strategy, and it's sound product management. So the ability to take all of those things, to have a creative vision, to use the data, to measure your success against, and then ultimately to manage those things through to product innovation, which is what I do at Prezi on the growth team. A quote that I think I'll just kind of use to kick off the conversation that I think has been a big guider for me. The gist here is let go of the idea that you have to figure everything out in advance. There's so much to be gained from an embrace of a data-driven orientation with regard to how you do what you do in growing your business. So you don't have to figure it all out in advance. Don't try to have that master scheme when you get going. It's much better to have a process through which you learn very quickly and take advantage of those learnings in a very short loop. These are some of the companies where I've worked and where I've learned some of the things that I'll be talking about in this talk. A couple of those you'll recognize are SaaS providers delivering through online. How many of you guys work for companies that are delivering software to customers through the web? Great. How many of you are concerned with acquiring those customers on the web? Right, most of you, great. So the relevancy of my talk I think will apply particularly to you guys. Since that's my background, that's my experience, is growing web-based businesses. So I'll be talking about freemium model mechanics in the context of these companies where I've worked and kind of trying to bring things out to a more general level of understanding. So my background academically is physics, and so for me this is kind of like the problem where when what you have is a hammer, you tend to see everything as a nail. In my case, I tend to see everything as a system. The one defense of that is that maybe it's okay to see everything as a nail when what you want to do with everything is hammer it. Haha. So one of the things that I think it's kind of cool to do when you offer to give people a new perspective over something that they might already feel pretty familiar with, I think that they are, is kind of impose some new terms on them, just kind of make them to try to think and see things a little differently. So I'm going to use these terms in the talk, and the first is user momentum, right? And just user momentum is just that energy users have in your product to do the things that you want them to do. Some users have a little of it, some users have more, right? So just simple concept. Then the next concept is kind of total energy. So the more momentum, the higher the average momentum of your users times the number of users, that's the total energy in your system. So we're not thinking about revenue, we're not thinking about particular actions, we're just trying to kind of get a whole picture of what we got to work with from a system standpoint, right? And then resistance is inevitably those parts of the product, whether by design or accident, that get in the way of people performing the actions that you want them to perform. That's kind of how I see things, right? So the physics of the funnel, simple funnel, let's just revisit it, right? So it's a simple input-output system. Users go in, effects come out. There are different kinds of effects. So I want you to think in terms of not only getting money out of users, but users through their use of the product have other effects that are kind of cool. And if you focus on them, you can I think, obtain a greater value out of the entire system. So revenue is one great result. But there are other good effects that can come about from having people use your product. Things like user-generated content, referrals, right? Getting people who are using your product to bring in other people. These things have value, which ultimately we can attach dollar value to, although not directly to revenue, or at least not immediately, right? And then user data. So the idea here is that these are outputs that are kind of one step divorced from monetization. But they have value, and if we think of them and if we recognize them, then we can build a bigger, better system that takes full advantage of everything that's going on, which is my big point. So I want to talk about a couple of different models that you might recognize. This is your standard paywall. You get people to sign up, they pay, some pay, right? And then they go on to use the product, and that results in the generation of money. So these models are typically constrained in one of two ways. They either give you a limited feature set, functionally constrained, or they give you the full use of the product for some amount of time, 30 days, whatever, 10 days, free trial, time constrained. So I see these things as fundamentally similar, right? In the products what happens between the sign up and the paywall is what you have to try to do is you have to try to sustain or increase user momentum. So you bring in a user, the paywall is a hard wall. It's resistance to the max, right? So how do we build energy in that part of the product in order to get people through that wall? Thinking about it just from a pure input-output standpoint, right? They have to overcome that paywall resistance. This is one of the companies where I've worked, which is a great example of that model, and I'll kind of talk to you about a little bit how it worked and how we achieved some of the results that we achieved. So it was constrained, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with dating sites, but the way that our site worked was we got you to sign up, and then you could browse users, you could see people who were possible candidates for you to date, but then you couldn't contact them. So the desire to contact people was the motivator, the energy builder, the momentum builder, and the paywall was that hiding that feature behind the pay, right? So an super important metric for Friend Finder was the daily email confirmation ratio, right? So you couldn't even get into this system unless we had confirmed, meaning we sent you an email and you said, yes, I'm a human being, confirming your email address. You couldn't even get into this system without doing that. So the email confirmation ratio was a top daily level KPI that told us the basic health of the system, since if there was a decline for whatever reason in email confirmation, that meant that less people were going into the system, right? So a super important metric. And as I said, the way that this worked is we showed you user profiles and gave you the ability to navigate. And so the way that worked out is, at the end of the day, 1 in 20 people who entered the funnel converted. Huge, enormous, right? Great success. And then the average retention of this system was 2.5 months. And so the average LTV was about $100, which is why the company, and the way they worked is once you had confirmed your email, you were just continuously pounded until you converted. So it was an ultimate conversion ratio of 1 in 20, owing to this great utilization of customer data and this mechanical model that forced you to give us your email address before we even let you into the product, right? So that company, by the way, sold for $500 million in 2007, 95% owned by the founder CEO, Andrew Conroy, brilliant guy that taught me all this stuff. And it was at a deep discount because revenues were $380 at that time. So imagine that. So let's visit this model a little bit. So the pros is it's just a real easy model to optimize. You can explain it in a sentence. It's a straight shot. It's simple, easy to model and project. Once you see what your conversion ratios are between the different steps, you can see ways to optimize the flow. For example, the email was just a momentum builder that kept bringing people back into the site, right? We paid hard attention to that conversion ratio, focusing product iteration on those upgrade mechanisms, right, making that real attractive. So this is where the product focus went, as dictated by the simplicity of this funnel. The cons are it dissipates a lot of energy, right? Because there's a couple of high bars up there. Not that you would want to accept anyone without a confirmed email address, but it is a barrier, right? So some people who maybe didn't come back or whatever wouldn't be able to access the system. So there's some loss there, and then there's a lot of loss because you don't get people. what made Friend Finder so successful is that, like I said, it created this virtual use that you could use the product almost every day before you were paid for it. So it was brilliant because it allowed for a high, frequent level of engagement within the free zone, and yet the possibility of payment and upgrading and getting access to the communications channels that the product gave you were always right there, so that as soon as you found someone that was, hey, that one, there it was, the paywall, right? So it did a great job. It blocked a lot of people, it kept a lot of people out, but it did a great job building momentum in the people that it let in. And so sign-ups with a lower level of momentum, so people who never have enough momentum to get over the paywall never use the product. But Friend Finder didn't have this problem, but something a little less passion-driving might, right? So I also want to share some growth hacks that we participated in at the companies where I've worked. The first one is Friend Finder. And these growth hacks relate to this idea of taking full advantage of all the stuff that's being created in your system, right? So have you guys ever seen ads like this where there are thumbnails of users and it identifies you as being from a particular location? So we invented those at Friend Finder, actually, very first. And what we did is we saw that user metadata, where you live, what you like, etc., was very valuable in getting people engaged in that pre-pay zone, right, where we're browsing for users, because we let you browse by interest, obviously by gender, obviously by sexual orientation. So that all of that user metadata was incredibly important as part of driving that search for a date use. Right, but here what we did is we took that same data and we externalized it and we put it all the way out on banners. And this just changed everything. The dating space was getting competitive in 2002. When we put these banners live, people didn't see them as banners. They were like functionality. The CTRs in these things were like 150x what we were getting on banners. So it changed the company like overnight, just from taking user, and we were intensely copied right away, but for a while, it was an incredible surge of revenue and activity just from putting these babies live. It worked so well that you'd call it an API today, but then it was just an XML feed that we made available to affiliates so that they could get this data and build it into their own customer acquisition experiences on their own sites, which was yet another great big step. So, you guys with me so far? Cool. I'm going to have a sip of water. So the second model that I want to talk about is conspicuously different from the first. And the idea here is that we don't impose constraints, and that what we want to sort of encourage is unlimited free use, right? So how do you make money? So there's a couple of ways in which you make money, and there's the more way and the other way. So the more way is like you give people more stuff. Dropbox, more space. And I always love to remind people that this is a brilliant example of freemium at its very, very best. So if what you want to do is destroy pigs, we give you a more powerful bird to do that with. It's an example of more, right? Very brilliant on their part. And the other stuff is where I really get excited, right? Because this is where I've had a chance to do it at a couple of different companies. So find an alternative optional parallel use case that generates revenue. Magic, literally. If you find this, it's the golden goose. But there are the words. Do this and you will win. You'll win big. And so some rules about that. It shouldn't interfere with free use. Don't want it to get in the way. Shouldn't be forced. Shouldn't make people have to do it. And it should naturally attract some percentage of your total active users. So there should be, theoretically, some magic percentage of people within your free users to whom this will resonate and be appropriate. So let me talk to you about an example of that. So I worked at Eventbrite in the very early days. I was the second employee, the first non-engineering hire. This is the situation that they were in. It was a very crowded SaaS space, right? There were incumbents. There were lots of new entrants. What we were enjoying was modest WOM, word-of-mouth driven growth. CPAs in our space, as we understood it, were really expensive, and I'm talking about keywords like online event registration and sell tickets online, in the $12 to $20 range. Expensive. And we had no idea what our value model was. We had no data. We were new. We had no idea what it was appropriate to pay for customers, right? So how do you accelerate growth? So this is the strategy that did it for Eventbrite. So what we saw was that essentially the space that was serving events online was kind of divided in this spectrum. So on the one side, you had companies like this, and these were their defining attributes, old school. They made you sign contracts. They were just not well-designed software, just bad, right? They were web stupid. The other things I think are self-explanatory, but web stupid may not be self-explanatory. By web stupid, I mean is that here's a company that's like serving its customers on the web, and yet it isn't taking full advantage in any way of the fact that it is on the web. It is merely providing them a way to access with no apparent awareness of the opportunism available, right? We saw that and thought, wouldn't that be smart? And so on the other hand, Evite, super consumer, very utilitarian, but it was easy to use. It was simple, right? It got people it created a very simple mechanism for communicating with others. We saw that. We saw the virality in that, right? Something that the incumbents on the other side of the spectrum weren't doing at all. But it was still pretty web stupid. And by web stupid is like they didn't see the value of their own content. They weren't creating sort of permanent locations for events. They weren't working with search engines. Things like that. So it was still pretty rudimentary in terms of, there was no social dimension in it at all. And now, this is 2008, so the social thing is definitely happening by now, and they're not clued in at all. So we see that too. So what we did was, we harvested from all parts of the spectrum, bringing things in as diverse as big conferences and barbecues. And we figured that we just want to focus on making our tool as easy to use as possible. Let's learn, let's make it easy, let's see the mistakes that are being made by these two ends of the spectrums, and let's just try and eat a big part of this. And by the way, if you want to sell tickets, right, so how did we make money, right? So this is the result of that activity. So we had lots of events of all kinds. This is the result of that strategic choice to embrace a lot of events by category. So we could have focused on, just the events that are like worth $500, right? And marketed aggressively to them, right? We could have done that, but we didn't. So we thought let's keep our thing broad and open, and let's see how diverse a spectrum of events we can get. So we had lots of events, and we had lots of email invitations, because that's something that we built right from the very beginning. We thought that it should be part of our web smart utility to users, that we give them tools to promote their events. And one of the obvious tools for doing that, stolen right from Evite, was, hell, let them send invitations to people. Simple. Let's just give that away and see how that model works for us. So we gave something away that at the time when we launched it was competitive in its capabilities with things that people were charging you for. Conscious choice. So we wanted to offer value clearly to users and defer compensation to a different mechanism. So how did we make money? We made money only when people sold tickets. Use of the entire product was entirely available for all users. Now Eventbrite is a fantastic, complex app with deep analytics that you can still use for barbecues. Fantastic, for absolutely free. So if you want to see, what time zones your guests came from in the context of a barbecue. So by focusing on only this parallel, so small to the total, but when you made the big whole, it made for an explosively growing company. And I want to talk about an Eventbrite growth hack. And this is directly related to the strategic choice. So what we saw, as I explained, is that competitors, and this was true both on the incumbent side and on the new upstart side. So there were companies like us that were working with PayPal and simplified payments mechanisms on the web, and kind of trying to string together an events registration ticketing tool like Amiando and Ticket Leap. You probably never heard of them, but we were aware of them as sort of contenders in this early time when no winner had yet emerged. So what we saw is that neither them nor the old guys, the Cvents, the Activas, the Reg Onlines, were even indexing their events or giving a shit at all about doing that. Here they were hosting some number of events per month, and yet when you went to Google, they weren't there. Who was there? Crap aggregators like Zvents and Eventful that were monetizing through ads that Google had no choice but to list because they were the only listings available for those events. So these sites had the intelligence to go to the sites where the events were being published, scrape them in some clever way, and then expose that content to the search engine, so they were getting the traffic. We saw that. So the question that occurred to me as a big light bulb is, what would happen if we, a PageRank 7, it's a good PageRank, PageRank 7 site, made a point of getting all our events indexed? And this is actually what we built. So this was the result of our first all-night hackathon at Eventbrite. We built this thing called the directory, and all it did was, it was a simple self-constructing system that just made HTML pages. When there were at least 2 events in a city, it would create a city page, list those events, and we also took advantage of the fact that we already had simple categorization for events, like, example, is it a concert, is it a conference, is it a food event? So we had these basic categories that we could then intersect with the city categories, so that when people typed concerts in Canoga Park, suddenly now there was an event page there, assuming that Eventbrite had hosted some event in that city that fit that category. But what was great is we just built it and then it would just grow without any further attendance, right? So this is what I mean by self-constructing. So what's great is, there were once only 7,408 events in the United States for Eventbrite. Now it's like in the tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of events. So this was the very early days. So the result of this system is that it got all our events pages indexed on the search engines. And like I said, it also got us listed for a long tail of city plus event type combinations. One result of this that nobody really foresaw in terms of its ultimate implications is that it opened up the floodgates of a new kind of traffic, right? So here we had been this SaaS site that thinks our customer is the guy who's looking to host an event. Maybe he's an entrepreneur, maybe he works for a company. We don't quite understand exactly who he is yet, but we figure it's somebody that fits the self-description, I'm an event organizer. So there's this small number of people, and then there are the comparatively much vaster, much larger millions of people out there who are looking for events. And so when we built this system, we brought them in inadvertently, right? And so it changed what Eventbrite was. It simply changed the company, right? It changed everything. It was so dramatic, it just blew everything up. So we brought in these millions of event seekers, and they were coming in to look at the events. And then there was sort of this great fortuitous combination now of people coming to look for tickets to things to attend, and customers of our original customer set, who were folks looking to get their events attended, and in many cases to sell tickets to. So by delivering this floodgates of attendees, we created a new value proposition that didn't exist anywhere else on the web at all for event organizers. List your event here with us, and we'll get you eyeballs, right? To whatever degree your event was popular, et cetera. But there they were every day, millions of people over the course of a month coming to look for events of various kinds. And so that energy, right, that new energy in the system changed what Eventbrite was. Something that we didn't see coming at all is that about 1% of event attendees ultimately would host an event and then would then get on this. So it's like we lopped on this giant big funnel by accident to the top of our initial funnel that wound up containing some small amount of the people we were trying to get in the first place. So it just kept fountaining, right? And this is what Eventbrite looks like today, and it's become this very attendee-facing experience, right? I mean, it's like, here's some events you can attend, and then here's the button, conspicuously, create an event, it's free, right? So this duality, right? We created the events marketplace, and that's why Eventbrite blew up. So let's visit, yeah.
So I have a question for you.
Sure.
So my understanding is that Meetup has a model where every event organizer has to pay a monthly fee of like $12 or so, regardless of whether the event is free or whether it's paid.
Right.
And you seem to be suggesting that Eventbrite has the opposite model where if you're organizing a free event, you don't have to pay Eventbrite.
Yeah, well, I mean, the comparisons between Meetup and Eventbrite, while we made them in the beginning, and we certainly looked at Meetup and learned a lot from what they were doing, what was working for them model-wise and feature-wise, the comparison only goes so far. Meetup is more about a pre-existing community where you're kind of like trying to recruit people on the basis of interests, which does have some resonance to Eventbrite, but mostly we focused on a much more transactional kind of business where what we promised was not community, but customers, ultimately sales. And so that focus, I think, permitted us to work more efficiently towards getting people's tickets sold as opposed to getting them members to some club, that has a meetup, whatever that is, right? Versus like, here's a webinar where you can learn Hadoop today. Clear, focus, that was our business.
So do you think Meetup could have benefited by following your approach?
Don't know, no idea. I mean, they're chasing a different model, guided by a different set of data that I'm not privy to. Right? I don't know.
So you think
Yeah, I mean, there's this.
Freemium
Don't know. Yeah, like I said, I mean, if their model is we're trying to sell some package of capabilities to people who host meetups, I mean, I'm sure that's well investigated by them and thought through. Hope so. But it, you know, I'm not current on. This is me thinking about the event space back in 2008. So it's been a little while for me since I was current in that space. But I would give the benefit of the doubt to those guys. They're pretty smart. They've raised some good money. So anyway, moving back. So to review the pros and cons of that previous model. So the pros is it lets a lot of different kinds of users use the product, right? Both your barbecue hosts and your conference organizers. So this creates a very high potential for maximum energy, right? And it also gives you something really, really important that you might not at all get to take advantage of if you haven't awakened to this, is that people will use your product in ways that you didn't anticipate. And the more diverse the use that you give people, the greater the diversity of the people that you allow to use your product, the more you will learn about those things. So don't discount the importance of that, particularly if you're at an early stage and you're still looking for optimal product market fit. So the cons are incredibly complex. It takes a long time. I mean, because we invented it, right? It didn't exist before, so there was no basis of comparison. We didn't know ultimately how it was going to work. All of these relationships we had to find them. One key one was when we did make revenue, it took about 50 days post-acquisition for that to happen, right? On average, whenever we saw. So think about operating blindly if you're trying to optimize for revenue, you have very thin signal for the first 50 days. So we had to do things like look for early indicators of ultimately generating revenue, right? That gave us a better awareness and better predictability. So like you need to really have deep analytics in place. It's a whole other, sure. No, please. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of build it yourself, do it in-house, work with engineers, invest energy and resources and importance to the creation of your own internal metrics. For having done it at a couple of different companies, I'm a big fan of doing it yourself. You know exactly what you're trying to serve. Progressively, we've found ways to get much more agile. Like for example, in the Eventbrite days, it was all in SQL. Now at Prezi, it's Hadoop, right? So big data, but the principles are the same. So my recommendation is, so the alternative would be a pre-existing package, which can be great if for example, if your engineers are really appropriately enough focused on product work. So there can be calls, justification for making the call either way. But I'm a fan of build it yourself, right? So hard to optimize for revenue, like I said. So let's talk a little bit about Prezi. You guys may not know. So Prezi is this online presentation tool, right? That's what we've been calling ourselves for a while now. Prezi launched in 2009, and the market that we first latched onto was, let's help people to understand what we are by comparing ourselves to PowerPoint, by suggesting ourselves as an alternative to PowerPoint. Here they are, there's this number of people every day or every week or every month who reach for a presentation tool. Let's market to them and see what happens. So that worked really great, and Prezi has, in fact, this is Prezi, right? So I'm using Prezi now. So Prezi still works great for this. But in the meantime, as we've grown up, Prezi has become many more things to more people, and I'll talk about that in a little while. But in terms of our model, this is kind of how it breaks down for us. So we have two ways of using the product. And so public means that the Prezis you create on Prezi are listed, publicly available. By now, you guys understand that the importance of content and content output in evaluating the energy of a total system and the value of a total system. So those Prezis get published on the search engines, right? We take advantage of that. And so here's how our pricing breaks down. So when you sign up, you identify yourself as someone who is interested in essentially privacy or not. There are other attributes, and we follow the standard one in the middle is the best one kind of approach. But basically, the division here is it's okay if your Prezis are private, which is cool for some people who are looking to spread their ideas. Not everyone is sort of this private presenter, right? Some people are interested in seizing a creative platform that they will use. So this is not at all restrictive or prohibitive to many, many people. In fact, thank goodness it's not. So that's how people shake out. And so we're doing about 1.5 million signups a month on Prezi right now. And the folks who choose the privacy go into a 30-day free trial, and then we focus. This is a key metric for us: trial to pay rate, right? So we want to see that's an important barometer. The value that people are seeing in the product at the end of their trial. It's a key driver for us. So it's an important number. And so we also have some secret number of upgraders, right? And so this is that small but important percentage that I spoke about before, which is what really makes our system hum. Because of the way that it works now, we see that if we can just keep bringing in more and more people for an ever widening assortment of use cases, wider than just PowerPoint alternative, wider than just, hey, this is a cool new presentation tool, wider than that. If we can just keep bringing in that funnel, that small but important percentage of upgraders will just become a richer and richer pipe to revenue, right? And so this is the other significant output of our system. Money the money's good. Can't talk too specifically about the money, but the money is amazing. And so the other output is about 250,000 Prezis a day that we expose to the search engines. We're working on a new experience on the site. Make that part of what Prezi is a lot more important, right? So how are we hacking growth at Prezi? This is a public chart. Right, there's the URL. Those of you you guys go to compete.com, you know that it's grain of salt, right? I mean, so the absolute numbers are off, but the trajectory is right. So that's kind of what we're doing in the way that I'm permitted to share with a public audience. And so in terms of how we're growing Prezi, the bad news is I can't tell you. The good news is I think you guys could probably guess based on some of the stuff that I've done and the understanding that I brought on some of the other systems where I worked. And so this is woefully dark, but you'll see that there's a big gear and a little gear. And this is what we call at Prezi the big reveal, when at the end of your presentation, you convey some visual element that's true about your bigger picture. And so my final message to you guys is the bigger the free use, the bigger the revenue. If you have an opportunity to construct your freemium model this way, do so. And that's what I would describe as the physics of freemium. Thanks very much for your attention today. Do you guys have any questions? Not all of them, I shared some, but things like revenue and conversion dictate who the appropriate competitor comparison would be. But yeah, you're right. I mean, so there are a number of tools that are coming into this visual space. We think we've got an incredible amount of intellectual property and understanding established in serving this kind of a tool to people. I think we're way ahead, basically, in our development. Real hard for an upstart, even a well-funded one, I think, to get to where we are. And the traction that we're already enjoying organically is also a significant, I think, deterrent to someone coming into our space. And what's our space, right? Like I said, sure, go after PowerPoint alternatives. Yeah, go to town. I mean, that might leech off a couple of our customers per month. But the most exciting growth that Prezi is experiencing is just sort of like in this wild new territory, where we've got 8-year-olds who just jump right in and blow us away with what they do. Like, that's not a presentation. This kid doesn't have to show numbers at the end of the month. What's he doing with Prezi? You know, this kind of thing.
So it sounds like in both situations, you look at your space, you were underserved and focus on that, but you, even above that, you need the product more than just that one thing.
Yeah, that's what I meant about being careful who you decide your customer is too early in advance. Right. Because we could have been so costly to Eventbrite if we focused on revenue too early and missed a bigger picture that ultimately, like I said, had this attendee piece and then the social dimension where we're now leveraging Facebook. I didn't even go into that, where once we created a relationship with attendees and people who are going to events and had their social data, we could recommend events to them. And think of the value that adds now to the person who is thinking about what platform to use to host their event. This degree of social connectedness that only arose out of embracing the attendee opportunity, right? Because if we'd relied on our customers to bring in social connectedness, it wouldn't have worked.
So if you're not measuring revenue,
Yeah, right. So Great question, great question. And so there is definitely this time in the life of a startup when the relationship between active use and revenue is not completely understood. And so your point is, how do you optimize? How do you make sure that ultimately it's all going to work? And I would say continue to focus on active users. So long as people are using the product and invest in deep analytics that gives you perfect visibility into what they are doing in the product. And then use that data to figure out what you want to do, right? Test. If you have an alternative monetization mechanism, like for us it was sell tickets as opposed to having them be free. For Prezi, it's make this one private as opposed to they're all public, right? So this kind of adjacency is key, and until you figure that out, if you're really lucky, you figured all of that out in advance and you have a great idea and it works right out of the bottle. But if you focus on free use in the ways that we've learned from these big social sites that took years of insanely funded development to figure out, and many still struggle. I still don't think Twitter has it figured out, right? But they've got, their value is hard to argue with because they have this incredible use momentum. And so what I've learned is that by focusing on the things that create absolute growth in the system, figuring out the way to monetize will come, right? Don't stress on that, right? You're trying to figure out how to monetize 1 million people a day is a good problem, right? Sure.
So a related question actually. So are Prezi and Eventbrite both profitable now?
Yes, I mean, it's been a while since I had a look at the Eventbrite numbers, but yeah, based on where they were going, I'm sure they are. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I know Prezi makes a public point of saying that it is, so I'm cool to let you know that yes, Prezi is.
How many years did it take for Eventbrite to be profitable? How many for Prezi to be profitable?
Yeah, so the inflection point in profitability happens very early when you go from being bootstrapped, it's just the founders and maybe 1 or 2 people, there's no investment in acquisition, key point, to being suddenly funded where you have pressure to find scalable models of acquisition and then invest money in pursuit of those. So when the money comes in for that purpose, it skews profitability. Since now you're investing money, a lot of that investment is exploratory. Right, so I'm going to answer your question in this general way. It's common for companies that are profitable to become not profitable when they switch on the growth engine and begin to use a lot of money in pursuit of growth. So I've seen that happen at both Eventbrite and Prezi. Yeah. Anybody else? Great. You guys were awesome. Thanks for being interested in this.